It was a sunny Tuesday afternoon when everything changed. The world outside the window was as quiet as it always had been, a peaceful suburban neighborhood with its neat lawns and pristine sidewalks. But inside the home of Officer Samuel Carter, life was anything but normal. Samuel, a respected chief of police in the quiet town of Briarwood, had always prided himself on maintaining order. He was the kind of man who put his family above everything else, a man of strength, integrity, and duty. But that day, as he looked out at his daughter, Zara, playing in the garden, everything would shift in ways he never expected. Zara was unlike any other child in the neighborhood. At 10 years old, she had a heart full of dreams, but her body was confined to a wheelchair due to a severe physical disability. The world around her seemed to move faster than she could keep up, but she didn't mind. Zara lived life with a smile that lit up the room, despite her challenges. She loved to play, loved to be around people, and loved to feel like she belonged. Samuel's heart swelled with pride as he watched her, though it wasn't without a sense of pain. He had seen the stares, heard the whispers, felt the pitiful glances people threw her way. But Zara never noticed, or maybe she just didn't care. For Samuel, that was all that mattered. Her spirit, her resilience, her ability to make the world better just by existing. In Briarwood, there was an unspoken rule that everyone knew their place, and that place was rigid, almost suffocating. At the heart of this small community was its homeowners association, HOA, led by none other than Karen Adams. Karen was more than just a figurehead in the neighborhood. She was the self-appointed queen of all things proper, the enforcer of rules, the keeper of order. Her word was law, her standards uncompromising. To most, Karen was a woman who demanded respect. To others, she was a tyrant who held too much power over the lives of people who just wanted to live in peace. Samuel had always known Karen. He'd even smiled at her in passing, nodding as she griped about trivial things, misplaced garbage cans, dead flowers, or some violation of the HOA rules that, to the residents of Briarwood, felt far too strict. But Samuel never let it bother him. He was a busy man, often away on duty, and didn't have time to worry about petty neighborhood squabbles. As long as his family was happy and safe, that was enough for him. However, things were about to change. It wasn't just the growing tension in the neighborhood, nor was it the new complaints Karen had been filing against the neighbors. It was something far more personal, something that would shake Samuel to his core. It started one afternoon when Zara, as innocent and joyful as ever, found herself in the middle of a confrontation she couldn't understand. She had wheeled herself out to play near the entrance to the community park, blocking the narrow hallway leading to the sidewalk. She didn't know that her actions would soon be used against her. Karen, who had been passing by, took notice of the obstruction. She stopped, her gaze cold and judgmental. For most people, the scene would have been a fleeting moment, a small inconvenience, a minor issue. But for Karen, this small act of defiance would become an opportunity for something more. Something that Samuel, in his most unsettling moments, never could have anticipated. The conflict, subtle at first, grew into something far darker as Karen's power over the neighborhood was challenged by someone she deemed beneath her. And Zara, caught in the crossfire, would unknowingly become the catalyst for a life-altering event. This wasn't just a story of one child blocking the hall. This was a story of power, control, and the lengths some people would go to enforce their will. And for Samuel, a father who had sworn to protect his family at all costs, this was about to become the greatest test of his life. The very thing he had sworn to uphold. The law would be the very thing that would fail his family when they needed it most. Samuel's heart clenched as he watched Zara giggle, her smile wide and innocent, unaware of the storm that was about to hit. Because in Briarwood, the storm was coming, and it would change everything forever. The next few days passed in what seemed like normalcy, but Samuel couldn't shake the growing unease. Every time he drove by the park or past the entrance to the neighborhood, he felt the tension building inside him. His mind kept returning to that brief moment when Zara had been in the way, blocking the hall as she played. He had no reason to think much of it at first, but Karen's reaction had planted a seed of doubt in his mind. It was the kind of thing that didn't seem important on the surface, but for some reason, it gnawed at him. Karen had always been someone who craved control, always insisting on following rules to the letter. But this felt different. There was something in her eyes that day, something cold and sharp, as if she had been waiting for the opportunity to exert her dominance. Samuel couldn't help but wonder, was this just a random complaint, or was Karen now focused on his family? 2 days later, Samuel found himself sitting at his kitchen table going over some case files. He heard the familiar sound of Zara's laughter from the garden, her wheelchair wheels turning in a steady rhythm as she rolled back and forth, playing her favorite game with the neighborhood kids. He smiled, proud of how she had grown into such a joyful soul despite the hardships. She had never let her disability define her. But as he sat there, deep in thought, a sharp knock at the door pulled him from his reverie. He opened it to find Karen standing there, arms crossed, a stern expression on her face. "Good afternoon." "Samuel," she said, her voice strained with forced politeness. "Karen," Samuel replied, his own tone neutral, though he felt the unease creep back in. "I'm sure you're aware of the situation with your daughter earlier this week," Karen began, her gaze piercing. "I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but it's against the rules to block the walkway like that. It's a safety hazard." She paused, letting her words hang in the air. "You've always been a good neighbor, but this is different." Samuel's heart began to race. He hadn't expected Karen to come to him directly, but he wasn't entirely surprised either. The HOA had always been quick to enforce its rules, but this felt personal. Zara had been playing for heaven's sake. It wasn't like she had intentionally blocked the path or caused any real harm. Yet here was Karen, seizing the opportunity to make something out of nothing. "I understand your concern, Karen," Samuel said, keeping his voice even. "But I think you're making a mountain out of a molehill. Zara wasn't blocking anything intentionally. She was just playing." Karen's lips tightened. "I don't think you understand the gravity of this situation, Samuel. Rules are rules. If we let one person slide, then everyone will start ignoring them. And that's not something I'm willing to tolerate in my neighborhood." She took a step closer, her eyes narrowing. "The safety of the community comes first, and I won't let something like this go unnoticed." Samuel's hand clenched into a fist at his side. He could feel the anger rising inside him, but he fought to remain calm. He had learned long ago not to let his emotions control him, especially when dealing with someone as unpredictable as Karen. "I appreciate your dedication to keeping the neighborhood safe, but I think we can handle this without escalating things," Samuel said, his tone firm but not threatening. Karen's expression hardened. "I'm afraid I don't agree, Samuel. I've already spoken to the other residents, and they're all in agreement that this kind of behavior can't be tolerated. If Zara continues to block the walkway, I'll have no choice but to file an official complaint with the HOA board. You'll be hearing from them soon." With that, Karen turned on her heel and walked away, her footsteps deliberate and heavy as they echoed down the sidewalk. Samuel stood in the doorway, staring after her, his mind racing. This wasn't just about a blocked path. This was about power. Karen was making a statement, one that wasn't lost on him. She wasn't going to stop with a simple complaint. She wanted more. She wanted control. The following day, as Samuel and Zara were preparing to head out to the store, the sound of Karen's voice reached their ears. Samuel stepped outside to find her standing on the sidewalk, glaring at Zara, who was innocently wheeling herself across the yard. "Zara," Karen snapped, her voice cold. "I told you to stay clear of the walkway. This is your last warning." Zara paused, her hands gripping the wheels of her chair, looking up at Karen with wide, innocent eyes. "I didn't mean to, Karen. I was just playing." Karen's face twisted into a scowl. "Don't play dumb with me, girl. You've been warned. If you do it again, I'll be forced to take action." Samuel stepped forward, his protective instincts flaring. "Karen, enough," he said firmly. "Zara didn't do anything wrong. She's just a kid." But Karen wasn't listening. A kid who doesn't know how to follow rules. I'm telling you, Samuel, this won't be the last time we have this conversation. You might not care, but I do. Samuel's anger flared, and for the first time, he realized just how far Karen was willing to push. But even in that moment, something in him told him that this was just the beginning. A storm was coming, and it would change everything. Zara, still oblivious to the depth of the situation, smiled up at her father. But Samuel couldn't shake the feeling that this was no longer just a neighborhood dispute, it was a battle for something much bigger than that. The tension between Karen and Samuel grew palpable in the following weeks. What had started as a minor altercation over a blocked hallway escalated into a feud that seemed to permeate every corner of their lives. Karen's presence in the neighborhood became more and more oppressive, her small acts of power over the community magnified by her obsession with maintaining order at any cost. Samuel tried to keep things civil, avoiding conflict whenever he could, but Karen seemed determined to push every boundary, taking every opportunity to remind him that she was in control. Zara, meanwhile, remained blissfully unaware of the growing storm around her. She was a child, after all. To her, the world was a place of endless possibilities, and her wheelchair was just another part of who she was. It didn't stop her from doing what she loved, spending time outside, playing with the neighborhood kids, and living her life with an infectious enthusiasm. She would wheel herself through the neighborhood with a smile on her face, brightening everyone's day as she passed. She had no idea that Karen was watching her every move, just waiting for another reason to lash out. It wasn't long before Karen found her next opportunity. On a Friday afternoon, Zara had once again rolled herself to the park entrance, her usual spot for some afternoon sunshine. She wasn't blocking the path this time. She was simply sitting by the edge, enjoying the breeze as she read a book. But, as fate would have it, her positioning on the grass was enough to irritate Karen, who was out for her daily inspection of the neighborhood. Karen, as always, took it upon herself to enforce the rules. She marched over to Zara, her steps sharp and purposeful, her face a mask of barely contained frustration. Zara, she snapped, this is not a place to sit. You need to move. Now. Zara looked up from her book, startled by Karen's harsh tone. But I'm just reading, Karen. I'm not blocking anything. I don't care what you're doing, Karen shot back. You're in the way. Get up and move now. Zara hesitated, looking to her father for guidance. But Samuel was not nearby, and she had learned by now that Karen was not someone to be reasoned with. Her hands gripped the wheels of her chair as she slowly began to turn it, ready to comply. But Karen wasn't satisfied with the response. You don't listen, Karen continued, her voice growing louder. You never do. You think you can do whatever you want just because you're disabled? That's not how this works. Zara felt a tight knot in her stomach. She had heard Karen's cruel remarks before, but this time they felt different, more venomous, more personal. She wanted to roll away, but something kept her rooted to the spot, the weight of Karen's words sinking in. Before Zara could respond, Karen's hand shot out and grabbed the back of her chair, yanking it roughly. Move it, she barked, pushing Zara a little too forcefully. Zara's chair wobbled dangerously, and she instinctively tried to regain control, but the sudden movement threw her off balance. The noise of the chair scraping against the pavement caught the attention of nearby residents. Samuel, who had been walking to his car, turned toward the scene just in time to see Karen's hand still gripping Zara's chair. His heart skipped a beat as he rushed forward, his protective instincts taking over. Karen, stop! Samuel shouted, his voice sharp with authority. He reached Zara's side, placing a hand on her chair to steady it. What the hell do you think you're doing? Karen stepped back, momentarily taken aback by the sudden confrontation. I'm just trying to make sure that rules are followed, she said, her voice dripping with thinly veiled contempt. Your daughter was in the way again. She needs to learn some respect. Samuel's jaw clenched. He had always tried to keep a level head when dealing with Karen, but seeing her manhandle his daughter in such a callous manner ignited a fire within him. You have no right to touch her, Karen, he said, his voice low and menacing. This ends now. Karen's lips curled into a smug smile. I don't have to take orders from you, Samuel. If your daughter can't follow the rules, I'll do whatever it takes to make sure she learns. Samuel's fists clenched at his sides. You better watch yourself. If you ever lay a hand on her again, you'll regret it. The standoff between them lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. The neighborhood had gone quiet, with people peeking through windows or standing on their porches, watching the confrontation unfold. Karen, after a tense pause, finally let go of Zara's chair and took a few steps back, her eyes narrowing with disdain. You'll be hearing from me, Samuel, she muttered. This isn't over. With that, she turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the pavement as she stormed off. Samuel remained standing there for a moment, his breath coming in shallow bursts, trying to calm the rising anger in his chest. He turned to Zara, who looked up at him with wide, fearful eyes. Are you okay, sweetheart? Samuel asked softly, crouching down beside her. Zara nodded, though her lower lip trembled slightly. I'm fine, Dad. I just don't understand why she's so mad at me. Samuel's heart broke for her. Zara didn't deserve any of this. She had done nothing wrong. But as much as he wanted to shield her from the cruelty of the world, he knew that this wasn't something he could avoid forever. Karen had crossed a line, and now it was personal. Samuel had always been the one to uphold the law, but now his own community felt like a battlefield. As the day went on, Samuel couldn't shake the feeling that things were spiraling out of control. Karen's behavior had become more erratic, more threatening. This wasn't just about neighborhood rules anymore. This was about something deeper, something more sinister. And Samuel knew that, sooner or later, Karen's thirst for power would lead to something even worse than a confrontation. The calm before the storm had ended. The worst was yet to come. It had been a few days since the confrontation with Karen, and the weight of what had transpired lingered heavily in the air. Samuel couldn't help but feel that things were only going to get worse. Every interaction with Karen seemed to escalate, and he was growing more certain that she was not going to let this go without a fight. The worst part, however, was seeing the toll it was taking on Zara. The bright-eyed girl, who had once wheeled herself around with carefree joy, was now more hesitant, more anxious. She had become aware of the tension in the neighborhood, and it was slowly eating away at her spirit. Samuel's heart broke every time he saw her looking out the window, her eyes searching for the comfort of the outside world, but too scared to go out there alone. He had promised himself he would protect her, no matter the cost. But what could he do when the very person who was supposed to be the protector of the community was the one causing harm? It was late afternoon when it all came to a head. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the quiet neighborhood. Zara, as usual, had wheeled herself to the park entrance, her favorite spot for a few moments of peace. She had been trying to escape the tension at home, the unspoken fear that hung over her like a storm cloud. Samuel had been inside, sorting through paperwork, when he heard the unmistakable sound of raised voices. His heart skipped a beat, and without thinking, he rushed to the window. What he saw sent a shock of adrenaline through his veins. Karen, standing in front of Zara, her face twisted in anger, her body practically vibrating with fury. Zara was visibly distressed, her hands gripping the wheels of her chair, her eyes wide with fear. Without thinking, Samuel stormed out of the house, his mind racing with what could possibly have triggered this confrontation. He reached the scene just in time to hear Karen's harsh words. You think you can get away with this, don't you, Zara? Karen spat, her face red with anger. You think you're special because you're disabled, that the rules don't apply to you. Well, I'm not going to let this slide any longer. You've been warned. I'm done being nice. Zara's voice was barely a whisper, but it was laced with fear. I didn't do anything, Karen. I was just sitting here, just reading. Samuel's blood ran cold as he saw the look in Karen's eyes. This was no longer about the walkway, about the rules. This was personal. It was as if she had decided that Zara, and by extension, Samuel, needed to be punished for something they hadn't even done. Zara, get away from her. Samuel called out as he rushed forward, his voice firm with authority. His instinct screamed at him to protect his daughter, to end this madness before it went any further. But Karen wasn't done. She turned toward Samuel with a sneer, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. You think you can just walk in here and control everything? You're just like your daughter, weak, pathetic, thinking you can get away with whatever you want. I've had enough of this. Before Samuel could react, Karen's hands shot out, grabbing the edge of Zara's wheelchair, pushing it roughly backward. Zara let out a startled gasp, and in that instant, something inside Samuel snapped. His entire body went cold with fury, his protective instincts taking over completely. "Karen, stop!" Samuel shouted, his voice now shaking with anger. "You've gone too far." But Karen wasn't listening. Her hands trembled as she reached for something at her waist, a small, concealed handgun that she had kept hidden beneath her jacket. The sudden motion took Samuel by surprise, and before he could even process what was happening, the cold steel was pointed at Zara. His heart seemed to stop, his mind unable to comprehend the situation unfolding before him. "Get away from her, Karen!" Samuel shouted, his voice hoarse. "Put the gun down now." Karen's eyes were wild, her breathing rapid and shallow. She was no longer the woman who had just been enforcing neighborhood rules. She was a person unhinged, consumed by her need for control, for power. She pointed the gun at Zara, trembling with rage. "I told you to stay out of my way, Zara. You've disrespected me, and now you're going to pay for it." In that moment, everything seemed to slow down. Time itself felt suspended, as if the entire world had paused in the face of what was about to happen. Samuel could see the fear in Zara's eyes, the realization that the very person who had tormented her for so long was now threatening her life. He knew he had no choice. He had to act and fast. With everything in him, he lunged forward, his body moving before his mind could catch up. He grabbed Karen's arm, forcing the gun downward as she struggled against his grip. The gun discharged with a deafening crack, but it wasn't aimed at Zara. It was aimed at the ground. Karen screamed, pulling back with a mixture of fear and rage, but Samuel held her firmly, pinning her against the side of the building. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, his adrenaline coursing through his veins. For a brief moment, he could see the panic in Karen's eyes, the understanding that she had crossed a line that could never be undone. Zara, still trembling, had managed to wheel herself back, her hands clutching her book tightly, her eyes wide with confusion and terror. "Dad," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Samuel turned to her, his heart aching as he saw the fear in her eyes. "It's okay, sweetheart. It's okay," he said softly, trying to steady his breath as he gently reached for a chair, pulling her close. But Karen wasn't finished. Her voice, now laced with venom, cut through the air. "You think you've won? This isn't over, Samuel. This is just the beginning." Samuel didn't answer. His only focus was getting Zara out of there, away from a madness that had erupted in their once peaceful home. As he wheeled her toward the house, he glanced back one final time, meeting Karen's wild, desperate eyes. He knew that their lives had just changed forever. What happened next, Samuel couldn't yet comprehend. But one thing was certain, this was only the start of something far darker, and it was a fight he wasn't prepared to lose. The days after the confrontation felt like an eternity. Samuel couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything other than the haunting images of that afternoon. The sound of the gunshot still rang in his ears, the shrill crack of it echoing through his mind. It was surreal. How could something so violent happen in the place where he had lived peacefully for so long? How could someone like Karen, who had always been so controlled, become capable of such madness? The immediate aftermath was chaotic. Samuel had done his best to keep things calm, trying to shield Zara from the full weight of what had happened. But the truth was, nothing could erase the terror she had experienced. Zara was no longer the carefree girl who had wheeled herself around with a smile. She was scared, withdrawn, and anxious. Even though Samuel tried to comfort her, he knew there was only so much he could do. He'd called the police immediately after the incident, his voice shaking as he reported what had happened. Karen was arrested at the scene, her actions shocking everyone who had ever known her. In a town where everyone knew everyone else, it felt impossible to imagine the woman who had once been the HOA president, someone they all respected, now facing criminal charges. But there was no denying what had happened. The evidence was there: the gunshot, the fear, the pure chaos she had caused. As the hours turned into days, the investigation moved quickly. Karen was charged with attempted assault, and the community was left reeling. People who had once praised her for her dedication to the rules now looked at her with disgust. There were whispers, rumors, and accusations swirling around the neighborhood. How could she have snapped like that? How could someone who had always been in control suddenly lose it? But Samuel didn't have time to dwell on the community's response. He had to focus on his daughter. Zara had become more withdrawn, often sitting in her room, staring out the window, lost in thought. Samuel had tried to engage her, to talk to her about the incident, but she had clammed up. She couldn't understand why Karen had done what she did. All she knew was that the world she once knew had changed, and she didn't feel safe anymore. One evening, as Samuel sat by her bedside, trying to comfort her, Zara finally spoke. "Dad, why did Karen hate me so much?" Her voice trembled, barely above a whisper. Samuel's heart broke. He had known this moment was coming, but that didn't make it any easier to face. "Zara, sweetheart," he began softly, "Karen wasn't mad at you. She was mad at what she thought you represented. She was angry because you, just by being who you are, made her feel powerless. But none of that was your fault. You didn't do anything wrong." Zara looked up at him, her eyes filled with confusion. "But why would she want to hurt me? I was just playing. I didn't even do anything." "I know, baby. I know." Samuel's voice was thick with emotion. But people like Karen, they don't always understand. They see things through their own lens, and sometimes they're just looking for someone to blame. But none of this is your fault. You didn't ask for any of this, and you never deserved any of it. Zara wiped a tear from her cheek. "I'm scared, Dad. What if she comes back?" Samuel leaned in, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "She can't hurt you anymore, sweetheart. I won't let her. I'm going to make sure you're safe, always. And no matter what, you're not alone." As he sat there, holding his daughter's hand, Samuel realized just how deeply this had shaken him. He had always prided himself on being the protector, the one who kept his family safe. But in that moment, he felt vulnerable, exposed. He had failed to keep Zara safe from the one person who was supposed to be a part of their community, someone who had taken it upon herself to control their lives. The next few days were a blur of legal meetings and interviews. Karen was being held in custody, and the legal process was moving forward. Samuel had to give his statement to the police, recounting the events as best as he could. But even as he spoke, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The more he thought about it, the more he began to wonder if there had been more to Karen's actions than just a random outburst. He had always assumed Karen was just a strict enforcer of rules, someone who demanded order and compliance. But as the investigation unfolded, more details came to light, details that didn't add up. Why had Karen been carrying a gun in the first place? Why had she chosen that moment, when Zara was defenseless, to escalate things to violence? The more Samuel thought about it, the more it became clear that Karen's behavior had been building for a long time. This wasn't just a one-off incident. It was the result of a slow, simmering resentment that had finally boiled over. As the community continued to process the shock of Karen's arrest, Samuel's thoughts turned to his own role in all of this. He had always kept to himself, focusing on his work and his family. But now, it felt like everything was unraveling. He had been so focused on maintaining order in his own life that he hadn't seen the cracks in the community around him. He had never imagined that the quiet neighborhood he had sworn to protect could turn into a battleground, one where the very people he had trusted could turn on each other. The fallout from that day was just beginning, and Samuel knew that the impact would be felt for a long time to come. He had no idea how this chapter of their lives would end, but he did know one thing for certain. He would do whatever it took to make sure Zara was safe no matter the cost. The revelation was clear. This was no longer just about enforcing rules, no longer just about keeping the peace. It was about survival, about protecting the ones you loved from the forces you could never predict. And for Samuel, the fight had only just begun. The worst part was still to come. As the weeks passed, things in Briarwood slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. Karen's arrest had shaken the community to its core, but over time, life began to move forward. People had their opinions, of course. Some supported Karen, some felt betrayed by her actions, and others simply couldn't believe the transformation she had undergone. But for Samuel, the recovery process wasn't about what the community thought or how they reacted. It was about his family, about rebuilding what had been broken, and protecting Zara from the lasting trauma that still haunted her. Zara, despite her fear and anxiety, slowly began to heal. The bright smile that had once defined her was still there, though it was now tempered by caution, as if she were waiting for the world to turn on her again. But Samuel noticed small steps in her recovery. She spent more time outside, playing with the other children in the neighborhood, and for brief moments she would laugh, a sound that still felt foreign to him, but a sound he had missed deeply. The healing process, however, was never linear. Some days were better than others. There were moments when Zara would cry quietly in her room, or when she would become withdrawn, reluctant to leave the safety of the house. It was during these moments that Samuel found himself struggling, his heart heavy with the weight of knowing his daughter's innocence had been shattered. But despite the darkness that hung over them, Samuel refused to let Karen's actions define their future. He spent countless hours talking to Zara, reassuring her that she was safe and that what had happened to her wasn't her fault. He made sure to show her love every day in the little ways that mattered, through long walks in the park, sharing meals together, and simply being present for her when she needed him the most. And yet, there were nights when Samuel couldn't shake the feeling that something had been lost forever. The fear in Zara's eyes when she spoke of Karen's threats still haunted him. The memory of Karen pulling that gun, pointing it at his daughter, was seared into his mind, and no amount of comfort or healing could erase it. He had always believed that as long as he was there, his family would be safe. But that illusion had been shattered, and in its place was a stark, sobering reality. Sometimes, no matter how hard you try, you can't protect the ones you love from the evil that lurks within the hearts of others. The legal proceedings against Karen dragged on for months. Her defense team tried to argue that she had been provoked, that her actions were a result of an accumulation of stress and frustration. But the evidence was overwhelming. Witnesses had seen her grabbing Zara's wheelchair, heard the threats she had made, and knew that her actions had been deliberate. There was no excuse for what she had done. In the end, Karen was convicted of attempted assault and sentenced to prison. It was a bittersweet victory. For Samuel, it wasn't about seeing Karen punished, it was about knowing that Zara would never have to face her again. It was about knowing that the person who had terrorized his family was behind bars, where she couldn't hurt anyone else. And yet, there was still an emptiness in his heart, a feeling of profound loss that would never truly go away. The day Karen was sentenced, Samuel sat by Zara's side, holding her hand as the news came in. He could see the uncertainty in her eyes, as if she were still waiting for the other shoe to drop. But this time, she seemed more at peace. She had finally realized that she wasn't to blame for what had happened, that the world wasn't as dark as it had seemed in those terrifying moments. And as the gavel came down, marking the end of Karen's reign of terror, Samuel finally allowed himself to breathe again. "Dad," Zara said softly, breaking the silence that had settled between them. "Do you think it's over?" Samuel looked down at her, his heart full of pride for the strength she had shown. "I think it's over, sweetheart," he said, his voice steady. "We're safe now. You're safe." Zara nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her lips. For the first time in what felt like forever, Samuel felt a sense of relief. It wasn't just the end of the trial. It was the end of a chapter that had cast a long shadow over their lives. And while the scars would remain, both physical and emotional, he knew they would heal. With time, they would rebuild stronger than before. But the journey wasn't over. For Samuel, it was a constant reminder that sometimes, in the most unexpected moments, life could change in an instant. He had learned that being a protector wasn't just about keeping the world at bay, it was about facing the darkness when it came and doing whatever it took to make sure the ones you loved never had to face it alone. As they walked home that day, the sun dipping below the horizon, Samuel took Zara's hand in his. The world around them felt quieter now, the tension that had once filled their lives replaced by the promise of a new beginning. It wasn't perfect, and it would never be the same. But together, they would face whatever came next. And no matter what, Samuel knew that he would always be there for Zara, the most precious thing in his life. And in that moment, that was enough. If you enjoyed the story, make sure to subscribe to the HOA stories for more gripping tales of justice, family, and the unexpected twists that life throws our way. Stay tuned for more emotional roller coasters and unforgettable journeys, because you never know when your world might change forever.